This happened 5 years ago, when I was just 15. It feels strange to think that so much time has passed since then, but the memories remain as vivid and unsettling as ever. I was a typical teenager at that age, trying to figure out who I was, hanging out with friends, and generally enjoying life. My family had a servant, an elderly man who had worked for us for years. His name was Mr. Hassan, and he was around 60 at the time. He would take care of our garden, help with odd jobs around the house, and do other things that required more time and strength than my parents could handle. He was quiet, respectful, and seemed harmless. But then, things started to change. It wasn't anything sudden, but rather a slow shift that, looking back, makes my skin crawl. It started one day when Mr. Hassan came up to me while I was sitting in the living room, reading a book. He just stood there for a moment, staring at me with a look I couldn't quite place. Finally, he spoke, his voice low and almost reverent. "You're very beautiful," he said. At that moment, I wasn't sure how to react. I wasn't yet old enough to really understand what he meant by it, but I did feel a sudden unease creep through me. His voice had a strange tone to it, like it wasn't just a casual compliment. It lingered in the air, thick and uncomfortable. But I was young, and I didn't know how to respond. I just smiled awkwardly, nodded, and watched as he returned to his work outside, as if nothing had happened. I tried to brush it off. After all, Mr. Hassan had worked for us for a long time, and my parents trusted him. It was probably just an innocent comment, right? But something in the back of my mind kept nagging at me. I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't quite right. A few days later, I had a couple of friends over. We were sitting around chatting and laughing when Mr. Hassan came into the room again. This time he didn't address me directly. Instead, he looked at my friends and said, while pointing at me, "This girl, I find her very beautiful." The words hung in the air like a foul odor, and my stomach turned. I could feel the discomfort spread through the room. My friends started laughing awkwardly, unsure of how to react. They didn't know what to make of it, and neither did I. I was too embarrassed to say anything at that moment, but inside I felt repulsed. I just wanted him to leave. When my friends had gone home, I told my mum about the incident. She didn't seem overly concerned at first. She said she'd talked to him, but she reassured me that Mr. Hassan had been with us for over 10 years and wouldn't do anything inappropriate. She told me not to worry about it, but even then, I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. After that, I started avoiding him as much as I could. I stayed in my room more often, only coming out when absolutely necessary. I didn't want to be alone in the house with him, but I couldn't explain why. I didn't want to be rude, but the thought of his presence made me uncomfortable. There was something about the way he looked at me that felt wrong, like he was seeing something that I didn't want him to see. Then one afternoon, something happened that I could never forget. My mum had to go out for a few hours, and my dad, who normally traveled for work, was home that day, but he was asleep. I wandered into the kitchen to grab a snack. The house eerily quiet. The sun was starting to set, casting long shadows on the walls. As I opened the refrigerator, I heard the creak of the floorboards behind me. I turned, my heart suddenly racing, to find Mr. Hassan standing in the doorway. His presence was like a cold breeze that swept over me. He was looking at me with that same strange expression, his face unreadable. I felt a cold shiver run down my spine as he took a slow step forward. I couldn't move. I wanted to say something, but the words wouldn't come. Then he spoke, and I almost froze in place. "Can I have your number? I would really love to talk to you privately. You are very beautiful," he said, his voice low and almost pleading. Those words hit me like a slap in the face. A wave of dread crashed over me, and I felt the ground beneath me seem to shift. My mind screamed at me to get out of there, to run, but I couldn't. My body refused to move. His gaze was uncomfortably intense, and I could see the way his eyes lingered on me, like he was waiting for something. I didn't know what he wanted, but I had a terrible feeling that it was something I couldn't handle. My heart pounded in my chest, and all I could think about was getting away. Without a second thought, I turned and bolted out of the kitchen, my legs carrying me as fast as they could. I ran down the hallway and into my dad's room, slamming the door shut behind me and locking it. I pressed my back to the door, trying to steady my breath, my hands trembling. I stayed there for what felt like hours, the fear still crawling under my skin. What did he mean by that? Why had he said that? I could hear his footsteps in the hallway, lingering outside the door, and I held my breath, praying that he would leave. When my mom returned home, later that afternoon, I didn't waste any time telling her what had happened. My voice trembled as I recounted everything, the strange compliment, the way he had looked at me, and what he had said in the kitchen. My mum's face changed instantly. She was shocked and furious. How could he do this? After all these years, she muttered to herself, pacing back and forth. She immediately told me that she was going to fire him. There was no second chance for someone who acted like that. But even after he was gone, I didn't feel safe. It wasn't just about what had happened. It was the idea that I hadn't seen it coming, that I had let myself feel comfortable with him, even when something in the pit of my stomach had told me to be wary. I didn't trust my own instincts anymore. That wasn't the end of it, though. A few weeks after we let him go, we moved to another city. My mum had already been planning to send me to a new school, so the move seemed like a fresh start. But even then, as I unpacked my things in our new house, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still wrong. I would sometimes wake up in the middle of the night, my heart racing, certain that I could hear someone standing just outside my door, waiting. I would lie there in the darkness, listening to the silence, the air thick with fear, and I would wonder, what would have happened if I hadn't run? What if I had been alone with him in that kitchen? Would he have forced me to listen to whatever it was he had wanted to say privately? Would he have done more? The thought still haunts me. I can never forget the look in his eyes, the way he seemed to want something more, something that I didn't and would never give him. Even now, 5 years later, whenever I think about it, I feel that same icy fear creeping back into my chest. The memory of his words, his eyes, and the suffocating tension in the air still linger, like a shadow I can never escape. And I still wonder, what else might he have done? What else was going through his mind? I don't know. And part of me is terrified to find out.